All right, this is part two. One thing I want to mention, they put a piece of paper in front of Hansen when he was on the witness stand, and I guess it was something that he had received from some IRS agent, government agent, and it mentioned civil contempt of court. And they made a big deal about that because in Hansen's mind, he said he didn't know about the criminal contempt of court. And there's a big difference between civil contempt of court and criminal. Civil is where, hey, if they convict you on that, you got to pay money. Okay, well, I got to pay money. If I don't have any money, you ain't going to get anything, right? But if you get convicted of criminal contempt of court, you're facing 20 years in prison, guys. There's a huge difference, right? But the paper that Hansen had in front of him was civil contempt of court, and that needs to be stressed. I can't stress that enough. I also need to say that when Hansen was testifying, he said the trust was not acting in any way whatsoever, that it was broken down in a terrible shape. There wasn't any cash flow. And he said he was extremely concerned about government agents coming in and selling off that property, multi-million-dollar property, which is the value of it, for only $430,000. That it was worth a lot more than $430,000. And the point was made, and I picked up on it very clearly, is that property is very close to Pensacola Christian College. I believe I have the name right. And
when he said that, Tiffany Helpeggers objected immediately.
Oh yeah, she started objecting. That was one of her many, many objections. But here's the example that was given by Paul Hansen. Let's say that you want to buy the Walmart parking lot. Like Walmart's already built the building, and say, hey, I want to buy your parking lot. Well, you say, there's some land across the street that's much, much cheaper. I don't know just think of a cheap. You say, well, the parking lot that's adjacent to Walmart is going to be extremely expensive because the Walmart doesn't want people parking across the street and walking across the road to walk into Walmart. You got to have the parking lot adjacent to the Walmart, and that's what makes the parking lot land at Walmart very expensive. Well, the same thing is true with all the properties that made up Dinosaur Adventureland. It's adjacent to Pensacola Christian College, and they want that land because it's adjacent. It doesn't matter about the properties on the land or necessarily the trees or that makes it valuable. It's the fact that it's adjacent to Pensacola Christian College, and that's what made it so valuable. And keep in mind, Rebecca Horton, who I'll try to keep my Christian testimony, she's the one who first turned in Ken Hovind for this whole thing anyway. And the thoughts are that Pensacola Christian College has been after that land for a long time. Okay, so I want to make sure I get that out. I did mention that Paul Hansen's involvement in all of this is completely voluntary. He's facing 20 years in prison. What kind of good godly man faces 20 years in prison for doing something voluntary, and it's because he had a lot of respect for Ken Hovind and he wanted to do what was right, and he understood the difficult situation. Let me say this. Paul Hansen tried to speak about the difficult situation of Ken Hovind and also the difficult situation of him being in jail and Eric Hovind coming in and trying to maybe gain control of the trust. There seemed to be a little headbutting, which I can completely understand. But it's like Paul Hansen tried to explain why Eric might have done what he did because of Ken Hovind being in jail, and they shut him down immediately with objections. Objection, Your Honor, objection. It's like, why can't he tell it the whole truth about why Eric would have done what he'd done, why Paul's doing what he's doing, and, the headbutting that has occurred. It's natural when Ken Hovind gets thrown in prison and you got Eric Hovind's son thinking that he needs to take over the trust, yet Paul Hansen has been assigned duties to be responsible for the trust, that there's going to be a little headbutting. Absolutely natural. And so they're trying to make it out as all these big divisions. No. There ain't no. It's just nothing but natural disagreements, and Ken Hovind being in prison made it difficult on everybody. All right. Going through my notes here, guys. Proper challenge. He wanted to do proper challenge. Oh, okay, let me say this. From Eric Hovind's perspective, CSC Ministries, which I think, or maybe Creation Today or something, Eric Hovind's perspective, they own the property, or they own the trust. Sorry, they own the trust. But from Paul Hansen's perspective, his trust owned. I mean, he was part of a 5-member group, and I don't know who the other members are. I know Paul Hansen and Glenn Stoll, but I don't know who the other 3 members are. But they own the trust, and so when you talk about activities of the property, it's completely reasonable that they would approach it differently because they in their minds they had a different view of who owned that trust and who managed the property. Paul Hansen said his goal has been to seek remedy to preserve the property. Just like when you hand your billfold when you go swimming to somebody, the person who's entrusted with your billfold is to maintain and preserve your billfold and to give it back to you in the same condition that you gave it to him, and to not let it be torn up and devalued and have everything sold off piece parts. So that was his objective, and that's what his goal was. Of course, Tiffany's objecting left and right. Here's something. Paul Hansen said there's 2 types of lands. The lands of the U.S., in other words, the land of the United States, and the land that's not of the United States. In other words, the private sector. And he gave different percentages in different states, like Nevada has a big percentage, I think, that belongs to the U.S. He mentioned, I think, Massachusetts or some other, Connecticut. Connecticut has a very small percentage. But because he's a territorial jurisdiction kind of guy, that's very important in his mind about land of the United States that's government controlled and land of not of the United States, and he thinks there's specific rules and constitutional things that apply to those two types of lands.
He also said that when the government acquires that land, they have 5 years to give it back to the private sector.
That's right. He made a point. Hey, if the government's going to acquire land, just like my brother Rick said, that they have an obligation, that they got to get rid of it. They can't keep it. It's not that the government's objective to like acquire and keep all this land, right? And we could get into an Agenda 21 discussion and all kinds of other things.
He spoke specifically of Nebraska, and he said when Nebraska first came into the Union, it was purchased in the Louisiana Purchase, and the U.S. government owned 100%. Every square inch of Nebraska land was owned by the U.S. government. But since then, they have turned it back over to the private sector because they have 5 years to do that unless they plan to build a military complex on it or some other government complex. And now I think it's only like 1 or 2% of Nebraska is U.S. government land.
Right. So keep in mind that phrase is very important. Land of the United States and land not of the United States. Two types of land, and he stressed that big time. Let me also say that Paul Henson made it very critical that it's important to keep all those properties contained in one unit. That if you take one unit, there's like, I don't know, maybe nine different...
A chain. He referred to a chain.
Yeah, the property chain. And
take one link out, it makes the rest of the chain devalued.
Right, and the example he gave is that the part of the land that was sold off to Jaworski, that was the parking lot for the theme park, Dinosaur Adventureland. And if you don't have a parking lot, you don't have a business. You can't get people to come and park their cars and attend the parking lot. Not only that, but he did stress that you could attend Dinosaur Adventureland free of charge if you wanted to. So that's absolutely true. But you could also provide donations, and I think they made their money off of the people that came to the park and provided donations, right? And so it was free of charge, and yet they did have donations to keep the theme park running and to pay the expenses and all the things that come along with it. And I think there was a lot of wonderful biblical truth that was shared through that theme park.
He also said that was costing them $5,000.
Oh, right.
A day.
Was it a day or a month?
A month.
A month?
And they were charging... They were trying to charge Anthony Jaworski
$3,000
a month.
Right. Well, he made the point. He said, here's what the point. They made a big deal about this letter that was sent to Anthony Jaworski, and I don't want to say anything negative about him because I don't know the full story. But he had a lot of either health problems or some there was just something. He had a problem sitting up, a problem standing down. Sitting down and standing up. But there was a big deal made about this letter that was sent to Anthony Jaworski and says, hey, there was a $100 a day charge. But the point Paul Henson made was that letter wasn't sent in a threatening way, but it was sent to establish a record that it's costing Dinosaur Adventureland money to not have access to that land anymore, and that when they take this up in a U.S. court in the future, and they believe they will win, that they needed a record established with the current occupant of the land that this is how much it's costing them. And so that's why they sent the letter to Jaworski. And Paul Henson even said, if I had known his condition as an elderly man, someone who's challenged, I don't want to say mentally, folks, but it just seems like he had a hard time formulating his thoughts, and we need to pray for him. I would never say anything bad about him. I don't know the man, but he did have some challenges as he was giving his testimony. He may be elderly, problems walking. But here's the deal. Paul Henson said if he had known his condition, he would have worded it maybe not so succinctly or so straightforward. He would have taken into consideration the man's health condition. As a matter of fact, when Ken Hovind wrote the letter, Ken Hovind wrote a very congenial letter and said, we're both Eagle Scouts. I understand you've been tricked into this property. Our intention is to get the property back, and we want to make sure you get paid for all your damages. So there was never any threats to Jaworski, no matter what they say.
Ken Hovind apologized that he had been tricked by the government.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And also this guy named Anders, I believe, that came in and said that Paul Henson used his address inappropriately as a return address. Paul Hansen explained that. He said it's very common practice to use somebody else's address as a return address. And when that was presented, when Anders was on the witness stand, it was like, oh, look, he's being deceptive. He used the wrong return address. It's like, no, that's very common practice. And what Paul Hansen said is that if the government responds or doesn't respond, that Anders is a notary. Right? And so the notary named Anders will be able to testify whether the government responded or whether the government didn't respond, and it won't just be Hansen's word, right? In other words, that he's going to be able to get a third party, and so that's why he put the return address. He said that's very common practice. There's nothing deceptive or illegal about that, even though the government tries to paint everything that Hansen and KentHovind does as illegal. He said that he addressed that return address as not being his own. It's no big deal. We talked about the value of the properties have to be kept together. If you take the parking lot, you lose the value of the Dinosaur Adventureland because nobody can park. We talked about Eric Hovind and KentHovind and Paul Hansen not agreeing all the time. They butted heads, no big deal. Completely natural. And they act like it's a big deal. Oh, they butted heads, they didn't agree. Hey, have one of you ever sat down and had lunch or dinner with anybody you agreed with 100%? I mean, come on, guys. We're talking about grown men here that have their own opinions, own beliefs. Not a big deal that they don't agree all the time on how to handle the property. What else, guys? Tiffany's objecting left and right. Oh, the 4 government officials sitting on the front row. No, none of the audience is able to sit on the front row. Charles Evans, Scott Snyder's buddy, decided to sit right in front of me to block my view.
Why is Charles Evans still in the courtroom?
Yeah, why is Charles Evans?
They're finished with him as a witness.
Right. These guys have a personal vendetta against KentHovind and Paul Hansen. They're after them to shut them up. I made a note here that Margaret Casey Rogers inserts instructions constantly about what can be considered as clouding the title and what can't be considered as clouding the title. Voided by order of... Paul Hansen... Okay, there was a trust vote. Keep in mind, this trust had 5 people, not just Paul Hansen. Glenn Stoll and 3 others. I don't know the identity of the 3 others. But Paul Hansen did not participate in that trust vote. And in Paul Hansen's mind, anything that was sent out by that particular vote, that kind of... made Paul Hansen immune because he didn't participate in the vote. You understand what I mean? So if there is a criminal contempt of order for sending mailing a letter, I mean, I can't believe we're talking about mailing a letter and life in prison, but Paul Hansen did not participate in that vote. And so you don't have the intent and you don't have the participation. They valued the property, the 9 properties, around $2 million, and I think even Paul Hansen used this phrase, they were scared to death that the government's going to come in and seize all this property and sell it off much cheaper than that.
For $430,000.
For $430,000. And you say, well, there's a lot of it was sold back to Eric Hovind. Well, that's true, but it's got to be sold as a unit in order to maintain its value, right? Not piece part. And not only that, but Eric Hovind and KentHovind are 2 totally different individuals, even though they're father and son, and they have different ideas about how to deal with that property. And that's natural, guys. I mean, I have a 25-year-old son, and I don't get along with him all the time. I love him to death, and I would lay my life down for my son, but just because we disagree on handling a particular situation doesn't mean that I don't love my son, but they make a big deal about all these disagreements. They had to bring some water in for Hansen because the judge won't allow water in the courtroom, so they had to get some water because he's coughing left and right. A jury member, after they gave Hansen some water, they brought a piece of paper over to a jury member that had been sleeping. This is an older African-American male. I think he said he was involved in the landscaping business, and I'm not trying to, any bad mouth him, I wouldn't do that, but they did bring a piece of paper over. I did notice he was sleeping earlier today, and they made him sign a piece of paper. Now, what was said on that paper, what was written on it, I have no idea, but there was a big interruption during the proceedings for him to sign something. You guys notice that?
I did notice that he was sleeping, but I did see the piece of paper.
Yeah, they made him sign something, and I don't know if they were like...
said we need to take care of some administrative business.
Right, and since he was the one that was sleeping, I figure they may have had him sign a piece of paper that said, if you do this again, we're going to bring in one of the alternates, because there's 14 people sitting in the thing. We talked about the differences between civil and criminal contempt of court. Criminal, you can spend 20 years in prison. Civil, you just got to pay money. Paul did not want to defraud anyone. He said he never intended to defraud anyone. He never conspired with anybody to defraud anyone. They talked about the fact that they sold this property off to Jaworski. They were losing $5,000 per month, but they said they just wanted to establish on record. That's why they sent the letter to Jaworski, not to threaten him. Letter was to establish a record. They took lunch break around 12:30. They talked about jury instructions some more. Judge Margaret Casey Rogers says, I want you guys, the defense and the prosecution, to look at the jury instructions. Keep in mind, Judge Margaret Casey Rogers in the first trial 8 years ago changed the jury instruction at the last moment, and that's one of the reasons that we believe they came back with a conviction. It's very important that they have to prove intent, willful intent. It's much harder to prove that. Tiffany talked about the definition of conspiracy. She wants that included. I made a note to myself that I got to get some more pens because I'm taking so many notes I'm running out of ink. The biggest thing I want to mention, guys, and wrapping up, thank you guys for your prayers. We need to keep Alan Hull in our prayer. The Satan is coming against him. He was not sick yesterday. He looked terrible this morning, but we did lay our hands on the brother. We anointed him with oil. We're going to claim that the Bible is the truth, and the Bible says if you anoint him with oil and pray with elders, that he will be healed. And so we're going to claim that. I would say the last thing I got to say, and I want to make sure everybody has a chance to say whatever they want to say, is you guys need to be out here. Okay, I can't stress that enough. Ken Hovind could go to prison for the rest of his life. Has he helped you? Did he tell you about evolution? Did he tell you about other things? Did he come out to your church? Have you watched his videos? Ken Hovind needs you. I'm telling you, it could make a huge positive impact to see a lot of peaceful Christians in a peaceful assembly if that courtroom is packed with supporters when Ken Hovind gets up on that stand, which could be as early as this afternoon or it could be tomorrow. And it changes the dynamics of everything in the room. Hey, guys, there was a lot of people out here today that wasn't out here yesterday. Guess what? They let me take notes, right? That Randall Hausner, who's been so mean to me and gruff and telling me not, he actually smiled at me today. You think that has something to do with, like, there's 30 other Christians in the room? It changes the spiritual makeup and integrity of that room when there's good, godly people in that room, okay? Look, you pray about it. You do what your heart convicts you. You pray to God and ask God what He thinks you should do. I'm asking you, please get down here to 1 North Pensacola Street in, well, I'm sorry, let me say that again. Oh, my goodness. 1 North Palafox, P-A-L-A-F-Fox, F-O-X Street in Pensacola, Florida. Anything in wrapping, guys, that you want to say before I close this down and get it out?
I just would re-emphasize that the courtroom needs to be packed with supporters.
Amen.
It's already just the number of extra people we had this week has changed the dynamics of this court. And you can see it in the temperament of the court officers, and the judge even seems to be somewhat backpedaling.
Right. It's like when there's 3 people that support Ken Hovind in the room, and they think of us as all, rebels and sovereign citizens, and but when there's 30 people and there's good godly, there's families, there's children in there, there's women wearing long dresses, and it's just a good godly atmosphere. It changes the dynamic. Help us out, guys. Get down here if you can. We only got 2 or 3 more days. We don't know how long this thing's going to go, but please pray about it. If you feel convicted, come down here. We run out here every recess, every lunch break, and so if we're out of breath, if it seems like we're trying to go fast, it's because we have limited time to get these things out. So, any other things? God bless you guys. All right, God bless. Take care. God bless. Let me shut this thing.